Hey, I'm Callum. I am a second year undergrad architecture student at Cambridge. This is my studio work presentation. So in the term just gone, we've been working on a brief in Bermondsey, which is an area here in southeast London. It is a very dense urban network, in much the same way as the rest of London is. There are lots of things going on, lots of infrastructure. There's this big railway viaduct supported on arches that run through the whole site. There are lots of industrial areas, a mixture of social and private housing, and a very broad demographic as well. So it's quite an interesting site to look at. I think it represents a lot of metropolitan London, and that's the reason that I chose this studio. So within the wider area then, I picked a particular point here, highlighted in red, which is a single isolated block to look at. I thought it's really interesting because there are lots of things going on here. Firstly, there's everything from flats to a pub, a bank, all kinds of services for the public, as well as even light industry, a small steelworks. There are lots of different functions within a relatively small area confined within a set of boundaries. So aside from it being just an isolated, really interesting block, the other thing that I found very striking about the site was it's desolate. It feels lonely and dirty and ugly. You walk around the back of it and it looks like this. It's messy, it's horrible, and it doesn't feel loved. I said that it feels like it's synonymous with much of London, and I want to question in this site whether it is purely a symptom of being in London that architecture and space has to look like this, or whether it's a symptom of Londonopia that exists because the architecture is like this. The site has already been part demolished. This area highlighted in red here is a region that's been demolished already, and that's what it looks like looking into it on the right hand side. And I wanted to look on this particular angle inside the site. So taking an almost section line down the middle, you get this, which is sort of elevations along the entire inside of the area. The brief for this project was to make a change, a small architectural change that has a big social impact. So the change that I want to do, the thing that I want to explore, the question that I want to ask is exactly that about Londonopia, as it were, to ask, noticing that the site feels desolate, dirty and unloved, can I change that through architecture? Can I make it feel like a nice place? Can I increase social connectivity? Can I create a sense of community and a sense of care simply by small architectural changes? So the goal is to firstly increase civic pride, and secondly to generate a more physical presence of community. And I want to achieve that by refacading some of the buildings and by reorientating the space, the entrances, in order to create a sense of flow through the site that drives connection. What does that actually mean spatially? Well, previously all of the residential buildings obviously face outwards, and again, lots of London life is facing outwards. You have your anonymity, nobody knows anybody, nobody knows their neighbours. I want to change that, so I'm flipping it round, I'm putting the entrances on the inside, that big sort of U-shaped flat block. There's this social space in the middle. At the moment it's a disused communal garden sort of thing, but instead why not make that the actual entranceway and make it accessible to the entire public? So I'm flipping the entrances round, and then I'm plonking like a courtyard in the space that's been demolished, such that there is then this central axis walking down that communal space into the courtyard, and that flow space is lined with entrances to all the buildings. So you come out of your flat and you see your neighbours. You walk down to the courtyard and you see members of the public. That it forces interaction. That's the hope. So in terms of the care, in terms of the refacading, this is what my proposed alterations look like to that same section cutting along the inside. There are two things here, as I said. There's the refacading and then there's the changing of the flow, changing of the space. Firstly, I want to explore whether the space can create connection, whether the space can change the activity that happens, and whether that leads to a sense of community. And then secondly, this idea of putting care into the site. Literally, in this case, exaggerating and stealing ideas from like southern France and Italy, putting in shutters and things that look very pretty are of course completely redundant in the British climate, but you know, shutters, railings, arches, fountains, is it possible that simply adding things like that, simply encouraging a little bit of beauty and a little bit of care into the site, can that change the feeling of being there? Can that change the experience of living there? It's the same question that you have with graffiti on trains. In London, any graffiti on central London trains is immediately removed on the basis that if there is a little bit of graffiti, the thinking is that it promotes a lot more graffiti, whereas if the trains have no graffiti, then people actually graffiti less in the first place. So similar sort of thinking here. By increasing care, by adding a bit of love to the site, can I increase the care and love that the residents have for their own place of living? Rather than living outward, they live inward and create more of a community. of course the ultimate of that being classicism. So I wanted to take the opportunity to use an excuse to do a really in-depth classical study myself and re-facade this building in a way that is, it's not necessary, it's exuberant, right, to have ridiculous, intricate Corinthian capitals on this facade that is round the back of this block in a very kind of small part of Bermondsey. But the point being is it doesn't matter, it's not for the general public, it's for the community that's there. By deliberately doing something for the sake of it, for the sake of putting care and love into the site, can I change the atmosphere? Can I change what it's like to actually live there? So that is the extreme of that, is kind of doing this ridiculous classical facade. So to conclude, this has been a really interesting experiment for me, as much a social question, a social experiment, as it has been a design proposal. The project aims to drive more social connection through remanipulation of space and hopefully force interaction between its residents in a way that they might not otherwise have done, foster a sense of community that wasn't previously there, try and get rid of some of the anonymity of London and instead create a sense of community, and more importantly, a community that cares about the place in which it lives. So thank you very much for listening.